Hey everyone, Cody Hayes here, and I'd like to welcome you to our next lecture on the undisputed letters of Paul. In this case, we are looking at First Corinthians, the letter to the people at Corinth. So a little bit with the date and the audience. First Corinthians, it was written around the years of 55 to 56 CE/AD. The audience in Corinth was both Jewish and Gentile Christians. So, kind of starting off here, no favoritism, purification, and Father Paul. You belong to Christ, not the person who baptized you. One of the things that Paul references in the opening of the letter to First Corinthians is how individuals in Corinth were essentially talking about who baptized them and making a sense of superiority of who it happened to be. And Paul stated, who baptized you doesn't matter. You belong to Christ, not the person that baptized you. To think of that with perhaps a more contemporary example, one of the reforms that the Catholic Church initiated as part of Vatican II in the 1960s is that it brought back the early Christian form of Christian initiation, which back then it was called the Rite of Christian Initiation of Adults. Recently, they changed it to the Order of Christian Initiation of Adults, but it's essentially the same process where you go through a process of learning about the faith. And one of the reasons that they decided to do this after Vatican II was because the way that someone, became a Catholic, prior to Vatican II, if they were to join, was they would receive, personal instruction from the pastor, but the church noticed that the person that came into the church, that they seemed to be perhaps more devoted, I guess you could say, to the pastor than really to the overall faith itself. Because if the pastor ended up getting transferred to another parish, another church, the individual who was brought into the faith would often quit going. So, one of the reasons why they wanted to bring back this old system, I guess you could say, was, to stop that from happening, where they would focus more on the faith. So, you can think of something similar here that's happening in Corinth, where individuals are focused on, who baptized them, but not really the overall faith itself. And that's the thing that Paul is stating. You don't belong to me any more than you belong to whomever. You belong to Christ, not to me, not to Peter, not to whomever. You'll be saved, but you may need some purification. Um, this particular passage in First Corinthians, it's cited as a reference to purgatory or the final stage of theosis, and that's why I have an image of purgatory down at the bottom, particularly the passage, the builder will be saved, but through the fire. Um, Critics, though, have argued against it being a reference to purgatory because they state it doesn't fit the doctrine of purgatory because the main issue is with the builder. But if you look, though, further in the letter, then it does talk about the community as a whole. But regardless of which, it's a passage that is related to purgatory or the final stage of theosis where you become godlike in Christ. I am your father, you are my children. Paul, in his Corinthian letters and other letters too, saw himself as a father, a spiritual father to those that he brought into the faith. And it's one of the reasons why members of the clergy are often referred to as, father. It would come heavily from Pauline theology, particularly in this passage from First Corinthians. So look a little bit now with human relationships and some early Christian apocalypticism. So we start off with issues regarding marriage. Now, one of the things that Paul mentions is that he wishes that people would be more like him, that they would be celibate and focused on the matters relating to the Lord, to Christ. But if you have this burning desire to get married, do so. Now, of course, he mentions that the instructions that he gives are not coming directly from him, but from Jesus, his not I, but the Lord. But he talks also about how a relationship can end, where if you have, say, a marriage where one individual is a believer and another individual is not, and something happens where, they can't work out their differences, well, then let the marriage essentially come to an end. Whether you want to refer to that as an annulment, that it was never valid from the beginning, or a divorce, it's up to you, but that the marriage can go on its way. It can end. Circumcision means nothing, uncircumcision means nothing. Again, this would certainly be a reference to both Jewish and Gentile Christians, where essentially Paul states that if you have been circumcised, that you were Jewish, and you become a Christian, don't try to remove your circumcision. Now, you might be wondering, how is that actually possible? Well, there is what is known as epispasm, which is a medical procedure, and it was known in Paul's time of trying to reverse circumcision as much as possible. And the reason that this was done, and in fact, this is referenced in First Maccabees, which talks about the Hanukkah story. In this case, the Jewish relations between the Jews and the Greeks, who at that time, controlled Judea, Israel, where Jews would try to find ways to remove the symbol, I guess you could say, of circumcision and have them fit more into a Gentile environment. But Paul says, don't do anything because it doesn't mean anything. And if you're uncircumcised, don't try to get circumcised. I mean, certainly that's a big element with a lot of his theology regarding the Torah, but in the end, it doesn't mean anything. And there's a big reason why he holds it doesn't mean anything, which we'll get to. If you are a slave, don't be concerned about it. If you're a slave, don't be concerned about it. Why? Well, in the end, it's because it doesn't matter. Because these human relationships, these situations, they're pointless because time is growing short. while Paul addresses these issues, in detail, he does state that, it's really pointless that I'm having to talk about this because Christ is going to return soon and all these issues are mute points. Like in the case if you're a slave, don't be concerned about it because one day, Christ is going to come back and all is going to be well. But if you do happen to free yourself, well, now you're a slave to Christ. But in the end, don't worry, all is going to be well. But because Christ is going to return, these issues regarding human relations are overall really pointless. Whether it's marriage, circumcision, slavery, etc. Well, there's one more thing to look at, but I think we will stop here. But when we come back, we'll look at one more prominent issue, one more point within the letter to First Corinthians. So take care. I will symbolically see you then.